This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. What I'm looking at today is 2023's The Flash, directed by Andy Muschietti. And if you've recently been paying attention to what's been going on in the comic book movie space, you've probably heard that James Gunn, who's the co-head of DC Studios, said that The Flash is the best comic book movie that he has seen, or something to that effect. And that's a very telling comment to make, because having seen a preview showing of The Flash, minus 10 minutes or so at the end, let's just say it is not. Not only is The Flash not the best comic book movie thus far, or once again, whatever Gunn said, it is not a great movie. It's fine. It has some moments that are really remarkable. Conversely, it has moments that are just not particularly good. And unfortunately, a lot of those not so good moments are way too long. The movie hits the ground running really fast, pardon the pun, with the Flash saving these babies in a hospital. It's a fun scene. It's really interesting and visually quite spectacular. It's just a joy to watch. But unfortunately, you have, for the most part, the entire third act of this movie, which is way too dependent on nostalgia. Which is to say, if you don't think too much of Tim Burton's Batman, or don't remember it, you're probably not going to think all that well of the third act of this movie. And the problem with relying on such an overwhelming sense of nostalgia, as the Flash movie does, is that if you don't like what they're referencing, it comes off as little more than fan service, and not even good fan service. For example, the movie in its third act references Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. Now, if you thought highly of that movie, it might work for you. If you were like me, who did not like that movie with a passion, it doesn't work. Nostalgia is a double-edged sword, and it doesn't work in the case of The Flash. Another thing is that you have Ezra Miller, who, never mind what he does in real life, in the movie, he's less a person than a collection of tics and weird gestures and so on. He doesn't feel fully realized, which is a good summary for this movie. And as you're aware, it has gone through at least, I want to say 3 or 4 prior directors before Andy Muschietti picked up the helm. And it shows. It is not a very attractive movie in many places. And by way of illustration, there are scenes where the Flash enters what I call the nexus of the Speed Force. They're not only fairly unattractive scenes, they're visually confusing scenes. And I only understood them probably about maybe the 3rd or 4th time seeing them. I started to understand what they were trying to go for. Though before I reached that point, I was just wondering what this was and what it's supposed to represent. As I said, very confusing. It's a movie that is too calculated by half, that never really breathes and lets you in. It's just barreling along at a train's pace, and God forbid you get in its way. It doesn't care. It would just run you over. This is, pardon the pun, this is not a great movie. As I said, it's watchable. It's not terrible, and it does have interesting moments. But at the end of the day, it relies too heavily on nostalgia. It relies too heavily on movies you may not like for very valid reasons. And as I already mentioned, it's from the perspective of a character you may not like. And once again, let's not look at the questionable things Ezra Miller has done in real life, and just look at the movie. He is not much of a character. He is not terribly developed. And that's not necessarily this movie's fault. After all, this character has appeared in other films, yet the producers never built on that character. So when he appears in The Flash, he is, as I said, essentially a bunch of quirks and odd behaviors. And I mentioned earlier how the movie just barrels along, hell-bent for leather. A prime example of that is his discovery of the Speed Force. The Flash is looking to bring back his mother in terms of the multiverse. And so he accesses the Speed Force to do that. But the way he finds the Speed Force is so quick, so without trial and error, that it seems odd that he's never found it before. Now, the movie, I think, is laying the groundwork that it was the search to find a way to bring back his mother that was the motivation for him to do so. But the movie doesn't show him doing anything that he doesn't typically do. In other words, he discovers the Speed Force and the Nexus. Once again, I call it the Nexus. The movie, as far as I'm aware, does not. He discovers it just because he needed to discover it for the movie to go on. This is not a great film by any stretch of the imagination. And what concerns me about it from the DC Studios point of view is that if this movie opens at $70 million, I've heard estimates initially of $100 million. Those dropped $30 million last I heard. If it opens to $70 million, I'd be genuinely shocked because it's not great. In fact, what I expect it to have is a decent opening. I'm assuming it's going to premiere on either Thursday or Friday. Decent premieres, a decent opening, no more than 70 million, I suspect less, but certainly no more. And a quick fall off. This movie, I have a sinking feeling, is not going to be successful. And some of that is not the movie's fault. Keep in mind, The Flash has been through at least 3 or 4 directors prior to Andy Muschietti taking over. It's being developed all that time, which is expensive. You're investing in design, you're investing in props, you're building something only to have the person who oversaw that building a structure leaving for various reasons. So when Andy Muschietti came aboard, this movie was already perhaps $100 million or more in the hole, and he only added to that amount. If The Flash is your thing, you might want to check it out. Otherwise, I would see something else. But what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow.